Yes guys, welcome back to the Fantasy Football Fix YouTube channel. My name is FPL Nacho, and in this video we're going to be looking at the Expert Managers team reveal, the one that you guys have all been waiting for. So if you are new around here, make sure you do hit subscribe on the channel, and if you enjoy the video, make sure you do drop a like to share the love. So without further ado guys, let's get started. Okay guys, so as I mentioned, we are looking at the expert team reveal over on fantasyfootballfix.com. And for those that don't know, this is a team, an amalgamation of some of the best FPL managers in the world over the past few seasons. So if you don't take my word for FPL voice, make sure you do listen to these because they are absolutely cream of the crop when it comes to FPL managers. So we're going to be discussing the current draft that they have right now. Now it's worth mentioning, because it is drafts ahead of game week 1, lots is changing. So this is the current live draft. But if you do want to keep up to date with the changes to this team, make sure you do check out the links in the bio over on fantasyfootballfix.com. Check out our premium membership, as you will get live access to how this draft changes ahead of game week 1. So of course, first up, we're going to be kicking off with the goalkeepers. And right now, Ederson is the pick of the bunch. Very, very interesting this season to see premium goalkeepers being the choice for managers. At 5.5 million, it makes it more accessible for us to actually put them in our sides. And with someone like Ederson getting guaranteed game time in one of the best defenses in the league, it seems like a great opportunity that a lot of managers don't want to waste right now. And importantly, because we play early wildcards with the way that the World Cup is structured this season, we're not looking at Ederson as necessarily a hold for the whole season. We're more viewing him in maybe an 8-game week sort of perspective. And over that period, it feels like a good use of your money. Then when you use the wildcard early, then we could look to maybe for a different strategy at 4.5 million. Worth mentioning that Ramsdale has been an inclusion in a lot of these expert drafts. So at 0.5 million less, if we want to shift that funds elsewhere in the squad, then Ramsdale has been the 5 million goalkeeper that a lot of these expert managers have been considering. So next up, let's move into the current expert team defence. And it's worth mentioning that Trent Alexander-Arnold, Cancelo and Reece James have been 3 players that have been absolutely locked into every single draft that we have looked at for the expert team. Trent, Cancelo and James all being very, very similar ilk of player, offering massive attacking potential for their respective teams and also featuring in teams that have premium defences. We're looking at the likes of Liverpool, Man City and Chelsea likely being the 3 highest clean sheets over the course of the season. And with their prices right now, in particular Reece James being at 6 million, it's a very, very difficult price for us to avoid. A lot of people right now are probably wondering, Reece James or Chilwell? Well, Reece James has pretty much been locked into most of these expert team drafts, so that it might be worth just having that in mind with those guaranteed minutes for Reece James, whereas Chilwell come back from that long-term injury. I think James probably just pips it right now, but again, if we see at the early start of the season, Chilwell hits the ground running, then we could look to maybe early wildcard or even transfer to Chilwell if he is really doing the business. Now, the interesting one in these drafts has been the inclusion of Zinchenko, somebody that has only recently popped up into these expert team drafts, mainly because of him only recently joining Arsenal and having a pre-season game under his belt, of course, against Chelsea. Now, 10.6%, he's still quite a differential in the game. And at 5 million, with him potentially operating as a centre mid later down the season in this Arsenal side, some are rumouring, it looks like a brilliant investment for Zinchenko. And with Tierney also being injured as we speak, him being at left back for game week 1 looks like the most likely scenario. And to get yourself a 5 million defender who could potentially play out of position in midfield, and with the amazing fixtures that Arsenal do have, it's very, very difficult to ignore. Now, one thing that is worth mentioning again, this draft is ever changing. And one thing that I have noticed is the structure that this draft has changed. In particular, the Zinchenko slot has become a 7 million defender from time to time. And that is pretty much all the time been Robertson. So right now, very, very fluid. A lot of the time it is a combination of this. And sometimes we are seeing a Trent and Robertson double up in defence. But as you can see right now, the flavour of the month is the single Liverpool defender. And we are going to see now what the midfield is currently looking like in this draft. Now, as I mentioned, we are seeing the Liverpool double up with Mo Salah and Diaz. And as I mentioned, it is ever changing where managers want to go, whether they want to opt for Diaz or they want to opt for Robertson. But as I mentioned, right now, Diaz is the man. And we are going to be deep diving into some 8 million midfielders discussion later on in this video. So make sure you do stick around for it, because I do think there is an argument to go away from Diaz and maybe to another 8 million midfielder of our choice. Now, the player that has been floating around between Diaz has actually been a very, very cheap alternative in Aston Villa's Leon Bailey. Been in great form over pre-season, and with the structure going towards a heavier defence, naturally we're not going to have the funds available to go sideways from Diaz. And Leon Bailey, with the great fixtures that Aston Villa have in their opening four, poses a nice alternative, albeit slight rotation risk if Aston Villa do go for their 4-4-2 formation with a very narrow diamond. I don't see a place for Leon Bailey in that team if they do opt for that strategy. So it is worth noting that for those managers that are currently considering Leon Bailey in their drafts. But Neto and Martinelli have both been in many, many drafts over pre-season. In particular, Martinelli, he's kind of taken a lot of the limelight away from Saka. Now, I think we all expected Saka to outscore Martinelli, but at 2 million cheaper, it does seem that Martinelli is the gem of the midfielders right now. I think his game time is going to be pretty secure at the start of the season. And again, we only really need to look at a 6 game week window, because naturally that is when the wildcards do start to get used. And then we can look away from these players if they haven't been the success that we are anticipating. But Martinelli has been an ever-present in these expert team drafts. Now, looking at the forwards, one player that has been absolutely locked into these drafts is Gabriel Jesus. Obviously, newly signed at Arsenal, has been impressive in pre-season to say the least, picking up a hat-trick in his most recent game. And somebody at 8 million who just seems an absolute lock for our drafts. I don't see any reason not to go with him. He's offering brilliant attacking potential. Arsenal have phenomenal fixtures, and he is a proven Premier League forward. I think that he is up there with Essential alongside Trent and Cancelo, just because of that monstrous ownership right now at 65%. Now, the one that has been quite interesting is the Kane Haaland deliberation. You can see the experts right now are opting for the Harry Kane strategy. Now, a lot of managers are talking about maybe doing Harry Kane game week 1, then moving to Haaland in game week 2 with that Bournemouth at home fixture, which is very difficult to ignore. Now, while I don't like planning transfers in advance because so much can happen in one game week, I do think that starting off with Harry Kane and that brilliant home fixture at Southampton is a wise move to make, because naturally we know what we are getting with Harry Kane on penalties in a brilliant Spurs side under Conte, who are now vying for a title charge. I see that being a brilliant game week 1 for Harry Kane, and you can see here that the experts have been opting for him. But I am going to be deep diving into Harry Kane and Haaland a little bit later on in this video. Now for the bench options. Gazzaniga makes up the 4 million goalkeeper. Again, there's been no emergence of a 4 million goalkeeper that is going to be starting as we speak. Now, Nico Williams has been the 4 million defender that has been locked in to every single one of these expert team reveals. But it is worth mentioning that Nathan Patterson at Everton has had significant game time in pre-season. That's one to watch at 4 million. Andreas Pereira, we all know, the best 4.5 million midfielder. Now, Greenwood has picked up the 4.5 million forward slot. I think Archer at Aston Villa is another consideration that we need to have going into game week 1. So guys, that is the expert team reveal. Again, it is ever changing, so make sure you do check out all the information in the bio to keep up to date with this draft. So I hope that has been good value to you guys. Now we're going to deep dive into some player combinations that I think are worth considering going into our draft creations ahead of game week 1. Now, one of those is going to be Zinchenko versus Matty Cash. As I mentioned, I personally feel that Trent, Cancelo and James, so a 7.5, a 7 and a 6 million slot in your defence, is all but essential if you are looking to really capitalise on those defensive players. Now, as I mentioned, the expert draft is floating between a 5 million defender in Zinchenko and a 7 million defender in Robertson. But if we were to say that we are going to be going for the 5 million defender route, I think the two to consider right now is Arsenal's Zinchenko and Aston Villa's Matty Cash. Now, it's worth mentioning that Matty Cash, for me personally, is the better option than Digne, although our predicted points have them very, very close. I believe Matty Cash is a bit more of a goal threat, whereas Digne is a bit more set pieces and chance creation, which naturally could lead him to being the better fullback. But right now, I am opting for Cash at 5 million. Now, it's worth noting, with the fixtures coming up, in the opening 5 fixtures, Arsenal have the second best and Aston Villa have the 8th best fixtures. In particular, those first 4 for Aston Villa are very, very good. Now, the reason why I personally am opting for Zinchenko over Matty Cash is first and foremost those fixtures. I can't look past them being phenomenal for him. And secondly, underlying stats we need to take with a pinch of salt because these are taken from his days at Man City last season. You can see he is putting up some very, very impressive numbers. But for example, expected clean sheets, I would expect that to come down when we do see him play in this Arsenal side because naturally Man City are such a dominant defensive unit. And again, the expected FPL points, if he can maintain that sort of form, then we have an essential 5 million defender on our hands. But as I mentioned, I want to take that with a pinch of salt with those underlying stats. But for me, Zinchenko is the 5 million defender of choice. With Tierney's injury right now, I do see him playing at left back at the start of the season, and him to be integrated into that centre mid role from time to time only enhances him as a 5 million defender option to us. So he is going to be my 5 million defender option. Please let me know in the chat, guys, what your thoughts are and which 5 million defender you are currently considering ahead of game week 1. So next up, let's have a quick discussion on these 8 million midfielders because I know we are still pulling our hairs out over this bunch. So there are the familiar suspects on screen here. Liverpool's Luis Diaz, Arsenal's Saka, Man City's Mahrez and Leicester's Maddison. Now it's worth noting Mason Mount has been excluded from this, but based on our predicted points, he is still right up there. So I'm just going to quickly run through the predicted points for the opening 6 game weeks, so you do have that on hand. Mahrez tops the tree on 36.9, which he is looking very, very impressive. He does get those minutes. Then Diaz on 28.8, Saka on 27.1, and Maddison on 25.7. It's worth mentioning Mason Mount is predicted to score 26.8. So definitely one to keep on your mind here. But right now, I want to bring up the most popular options available. Now, first up, Saka. As you can see with underlying stats, still very, very impressive. 0.33 goals per 90. Expected goals of 0.28. And in particular, FPL points per 90 looking very, very strong. You have to remember this is a player that played massive minutes over the season. So we are looking at a lot larger sample size. The thing that questions about Saka for me is the potential that Martinelli offers at 2 million less. I personally right now am thinking that Martinelli plus Gabriel Jesus is a better use of your money than Gabriel Jesus and Saka. I think that 2 million could be massive. And that could be the difference between you having Zinchenko at 5 million defence or Robertson. And I think we all know what route we would rather go there. So while I think Saka is a brilliant 8 million option, I think I'm personally vying for the Jesus plus Martinelli route. And then we can look to go Saka if he really does explode early on in the season. Now, Maddison is on the lowest predicted points, but I do think based on the talisman that he is in that Leicester side, everything good that happens at Leicester is going to be flowing through him. And we saw at the back end of last season, when he did get his fitness and mentality there, what an absolute gem of a player he is. But looking at the fixtures for Leicester, they are very, very tricky with 3 of the top 6 in their opening 6 fixtures. So I think Maddison, while he could be a brilliant option, his time will come, but it's not going to be in those opening 6 game weeks. And the big one that I have got massive question marks right now is Mahrez. I personally don't like bringing in a player that I question their minutes, but when we do look at these underlying stats, when the guy gets minutes, he is a phenomenal FPL option. And I've touched on playing an early wildcard in the season. That could be a strategy that you managers want to consider. Going for the Mahrez route if you're not opting for Haaland up front. Having Mahrez as your Man City attacking coverage and anticipating him to get minutes in those opening game weeks. He did start on the Community Shield and Grealish actually came off early as well. So I think that does bode well for Mahrez as a potential option. And I think Mahrez, while his minutes are going to be a massive risk as we know, is my favourite option at 80 million if you are handling those minutes risk. But naturally, if you are looking for guaranteed minutes, brilliant fixtures and decent underlying stats, and I don't think anybody comes close to Luis Diaz. His underlying stats, of course, are much smaller sample size, but I think if you are opting for a singular Liverpool defender in Trent, I think you have to go for Luis Diaz in the double up with Salah. At 8 million, he could pose amazing FPL potential, and I think some managers are even looking at him as being the cheaper alternative to Mo Salah. I personally don't see that, but Luis Diaz, for me, is the number one 8 million, followed by Mahrez, very close second. But let me know in the chat, guys, what your thoughts are on the 8 million midfielders. So last up, we're going to be looking at the discussion that has really torn apart the FPL community, and that is going to be Spurs' Kane versus Man City's Haaland. Now, of course, as I mentioned about Gabriel Jesus' underlying stats and Zinchenko's, we need to remember that these underlying stats for Haaland are taken from Bundesliga stats. So just take that with a pinch of salt. These are from his days at Borussia Dortmund. But if he is able to translate any of these stats into the Premier League, and in particular, a team like Man City who is so dominant in chance creation, then we're looking at an absolute FPL monster. And we can almost set and forget him at 11.5 million, leave him in our teams week in, week out, and he will rack up the returns. But you can see from the expert video that we did do at the start of this video, why managers are looking at Harry Kane, and it's because of that sense of understanding that he is guaranteed game time, set pieces, brilliant fixture, and proven FPL scorer. This guy has been an absolute monster, averaging 200 points over the last 6 seasons. And while a lot of managers don't like doing early transfers or penciling in transfers, I do like the strategy of going for Harry Kane in game week 1 and then sideways to Haaland in game week 2. As we know, Spurs has a tricky away game against Chelsea. Now, it's worth mentioning the Community Shield gave us a bit of an idea about Haaland. He posted an expected goals of 1.5, which is exceptional considering he did play against the likes of Van Dijk and Matip. And I really do think that Haaland is going to be a sensational player for Man City. But right now, I am personally opting for the expert team reveal in going for Harry Kane in that opening game week. I've seen great things from Spurs in pre-season so far, and I think Southampton in particular are one of those sides where chances are going to be on offer for the likes of Harry Kane. And with game week 1 predicted points of 6.5, it's very, very hard to overlook Harry Kane. The only way I think that Haaland is an absolute lock in your teams is if you don't like penciling in transfers in advance. Then you do go for Haaland in game week 1 and hold him through them amazing fixtures that Man City do have in the coming game weeks. But again, guys, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are and which player you are opting for ahead of game week 1. So that's going to wrap up today's video, guys, based on the expert team reveal. I really hope that has provided some value to you guys. And again, if you are new around here, make sure you do hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. And of course, if you did enjoy some of the underlying stats in the expert team reveal, all the information is in the bio. Make sure you do check it out on fantasyfootballfix.com. And we will see you in the next video. Take care. Cheers.